Hey, my name is Jonathan Hadel and I make music as Pink Buddha, and welcome to another episode of Music Theory Mondays, where we talk about these big questions with regard to music. Last week we talked about where does music theory come from. If you missed it, you can click up here to watch that one. And in that episode I brought up this question, do you need to know music theory in order to make music? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now to start, let's come back to this concept of music like a language. So let's talk about languages. Learning a language is actually something that's very natural. It's part of our DNA. I mean, we learned how to speak a language growing up without even trying. Now, sure, learning a foreign language as an adult, if you started later in life, is going to be challenging. But if you were thrown into a country where you didn't know the language at all and you had to learn it to survive, you'd figure it out pretty fast. And why is it easy to learn a language? Well, a language is all about communication. It's not just repeating some phrases and regurgitating some grammatical rules. Ultimately, you're using it to express yourself, your emotions, your thoughts. I mean, let's just look at kids as an example. Even at like age 3, they are quite communicative, even though they are essentially illiterate. They can't read or write. Now let's talk for a second here again about fluency versus literacy. Fluency is just being able to communicate in a language. Literacy is being able to read and write. According to that definition, you can be fluent without actually being literate. In fact, most people for all of history have been fluent but not literate. Reading and writing was something that the general population did not participate in. Okay, so let's come back to today's question, which is, do you need to know music theory in order to make music? Well, the answer to that question is really yes and no, because it's kind of a trick question. Most of the time when people refer to, quote, music theory, they're talking about music literacy, the ability to read and to write music. But if we come back to music as a language and we talk about fluency, you can certainly make musical sounds to express yourself and communicate and play with other people. For example, this is especially true if you're singing or if you're playing some kind of rhythmical instrument, which has been the way that people have made music throughout history, essentially before there was any kind of musical literacy. That's because you can do a lot playing by ear. Most people, if you were to sing them a phrase, dun dun dun, or clap a rhythm, bum 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 bum, they could repeat it back to you without having any understanding of how they might write that down. And this just goes to reinforce this idea of music like a language in the same way that kids will repeat back to you phrases and words and really have no idea if they're a verb or an adjective or a noun. Also, I think it's really important to point out that we now live in an era where we can record, create, and share audio like never before. And this doesn't really require any literacy at all. And I think it's possible to miss the significance of this. For all of history, this has not been any sort of possibility. Compare that to other arts. Visual arts, you could draw something on the side of a cave and people can see it for centuries later. That ability to create some sort of music and save it in a form that others can share and appreciate if they're not physically present with you, that is only something that has existed in the last couple hundred years. And prior to today's technology where we can record and share audio, that was done by music notation. And that's why musical literacy or notation was such a significant invention. So I think it's actually ironic that music literacy is lower in today's age, even though musical fluency is much higher. So that brings me to another question, which is musical literacy even necessary anymore? And we're going to cover that in next week's video. So if you're someone that wants to make music, should you learn music theory? Well, yes and no. If you want to be able to read and write, you definitely need to understand music theory. You need to understand that literacy. If you just want to record audio and share it with other people, it's really not that necessary. But again, let's talk more about musical literacy in next week's video.